The one the entire village feared most, never once hurt me. Instead, every time the sea god appeared, he would quietly take my hand, hold me while I slept, sit beside me through the night on the shore, as though he had done it for a very long time. The strangest part was, I wasn't afraid. Not just unafraid, I felt something like longing, a longing for someone I had never met until the day I discovered. The one who wanted me dead wasn't the sea god at all. I grew up in a fishing village called Wangai. No one knew how old the village was, only that the sea here was unlike any other. The waves were higher, the wind stronger. And on moonless nights, if you stood long enough at the stone cape, you'd feel something looking back at you from beneath the water. I had known that feeling since I was small, and strangely, I was never afraid. The fishermen of Wangai learned to live with the sea before they learned to walk. Learned not to stare too long at the surface of the water. Learned to be home before dark. Learned to bow their heads because this sea had a master. They called that master the sea god. No one had ever seen his face. No one knew what he looked like. Only that every year on the night of the full moon in the 7th month, the village had to offer up a tribute, a young man, unwed, unspoken for. And by the following morning, that person never returned, no body, no trace, just gone. As though the sea had swallowed them whole and saw no need to give them back, people endured this, because they had no other choice. But they had Elder Hao. The old man had no wife, no children, his hair white as sea foam, his back slightly bent from carrying too many years. He had never gone out to sea, never fished, only stayed in the village, performed the rites, kept the peace between the people and the water. Whoever had a problem came to him. Whoever was in pain, he soothed. Whoever was afraid, he calmed. Without him, the people of Wangai wouldn't know how to live alongside the sea god. No one knew who my parents were. No one knew where I came from, only that more than 20 years ago, Elder Hao returned with a newborn in his arms, saying he had found me washed ashore after a stormy night, that he couldn't leave the child behind. From that day on, I grew up in his care. He taught me to mend nets before I learned to read, taught me to read the sky for weather, to row back to shore in heavy swells, to tie knots that would never come undone. Every afternoon he sat beside me, guiding each stitch of the net with patient hands, his voice never once sharp with irritation. Hold the needle more firmly, don't let it slip. If the netting tears at the joint, the whole length is ruined. Like this, father? Yes, better. He paused a moment. Do you know why you need to learn to mend nets? I said, because torn nets meant no fish to catch. He smiled quietly. Not only that, because out at sea, only you can save yourself. No one can row to you in time, no one can mend it for you. His hand rested on my shoulder, heavy and warm. I teach you these things not so you'll be better than others, but so you can survive, whether or not I'm here. I don't need you to go anywhere, father. I know. The villagers would say Yan was lucky. Without the elder, he'd have died young. He would only smile and wave them off, saying he was the lucky one for having someone beside him in his old age. There was only one thing I couldn't explain and never thought much about. The old people of the village would sometimes look at my face, then quietly turn away. No words, no explanation, just a look, and then they'd leave, as though my face stirred something in them they didn't want to remember. A storm rose in the middle of calm season, nothing any seasoned fisherman had predicted. The morning had been clear. Fu and I were getting ready to pull the boat out when the sky turned black in less than an hour. Waves as high as rooftops. Wind shrieking through every thatched roof like someone crying. The villagers gathered at the shore, faces pale, looking at each other without knowing what to do. Then Elder Hao stepped forward. He moved through the crowd with slow, certain steps, like someone who had never known fear or had grown so accustomed to it that he no longer trembled. The villagers parted for him. He walked to the water's edge, stood there and faced the sea, then he knelt. His voice rose, not loud, but each word clear through the howling wind, plaintive, anguished, like someone pleading with something far greater than themselves. The villagers knelt behind him, heads bowed low, no one daring to look up. Only I stood straight, not out of disrespect, but because I was looking out at the sea, and I couldn't understand why. While everyone around me was trembling, there was nothing in my chest but stillness. Not even calm exactly, something more like recognition, like seeing something you've seen before, from long, long ago. I didn't know what to call it, so I called it nothing. Just stood there looking out at the sea until the storm softened and faded. After the villagers dispersed, only the elder and I remained at the shore. "Father, what could have made the sea god so angry?" he sighed, looking out at the water. "He needs no reason, child. He is the sea god. The sea belongs to him. We are only people living on what he permits." I was going to say that I had stood in the middle of that storm and felt nothing like fear, but something stopped me. I only said it seemed strange that the storm had come so suddenly and without reason. He turned to look at me. His voice slowed, like someone choosing each word carefully before speaking. "Do you know why our village still stands today, when every other fishing village along this coast was swallowed by the sea long ago? Because of the annual rite. Because of the annual rite." His voice grew heavier. "I have seen enough to know the sea god is not something to question or doubt, child. He is more ruthless than anything you have ever encountered. What he could do to this village..." He trailed off, shaking his head, then his voice softened. "I'm not telling you this to frighten you, but so you understand why everything I've done all these years has been for one reason, because I couldn't bear to lose anyone else." His hand came to rest on my shoulder, heavy and warm as always. "I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you, I know, and I truly believed it. Or at least, I thought I did." The next day the sea was calm again. Fu and I went out like any other morning. "Go a little further out, the fish are sparse near shore." I cast the net. Fu rowed, sky clear, water blue, wind just enough to drift the boat gently. If it weren't for yesterday, this would have been a perfectly ordinary morning. Did you notice how strange it was yesterday? Storm came out of nowhere, I was drying nets and the sky just went black. No warning at all, I noticed. What did the elder say? That the sea god was angry. Fu lowered his voice. "It's not even time for the tribute yet." A pause. "Are you scared?" I thought for a moment, then shook my head. "How can you not be scared? I'm terrified." "I don't know either." I looked down at the water. The sea doesn't feel dangerous to me. Strange, isn't it?" "That's insane, you know that? The sea has taken so many people." The net lurched downward. The boat rocked. I held on, the weight unlike anything from fish. It was the weight of something enormous pulling deliberately. Then, suddenly, it let go. The boat lurched so hard Fu nearly fell overboard. He shouted at me to look down. I looked down at the water. Beneath the dark surface, just for a second, a shape like a person. No face, no clear form, only a shadow of someone looking up. Then it was gone, as if it had never been. I didn't tell anyone about that shadow, not because I was afraid, but because, strangely, I wasn't. And that was what I didn't know how to explain. Back then, I thought I was simply braver than most. Now I understand. It wasn't bravery. It was only that whatever was beneath that water never had any intention of hurting me. In the days that followed, the strangeness didn't stop. My nets were always the heaviest on the water. Not a little heavier, twice, 3 times the catch of boats fishing the same waters at the same hour. Fu started cheering before the nets were even fully out of the water, just from the pull through his hands. "You really do have the golden touch, I told you." I didn't answer, just kept pulling. The older fishermen started asking to come out on my boat. No explanation, just that whenever I was there, the trip felt safe. I didn't know how to say no, so I let them aboard. The boat grew livelier, louder, but something in me stayed restless every time I looked down at the water, as if waiting to catch another glimpse of that shadow. I never did. But the feeling of being watched never left. Elder Hao, when he heard, nodded thoughtfully. He said perhaps the sea god was testing, that sometimes he bestowed blessings before he asked for something in return. His voice was easy, unbothered. I listened and nodded. I didn't know what else to think. Then came the day the wave hit. No one had predicted it. The sea was glass flat, the kind of stillness at early morning when the surface holds the sky like a mirror. And then a wave the height of a rooftop crashed down without a sound of warning. Our boat pitched sideways, water pouring over the edge, and I was holding on with both hands just to keep from sliding off. I heard Fu shouting, someone praying, the wood groaning and cracking like it was about to splinter apart. Then the boat stopped. It didn't capsize, not because the wave calmed. Not because anyone did anything, only because something braced it from below, held it steady in a position it had no business staying in. I stood there, both hands still gripping the side, heart pounding, but the boat was perfectly still, impossibly steady, as if the wave that had just struck it was no cause for alarm. Everyone aboard sat in silence. Then someone started crying. Then someone began giving thanks to the sea god, voice trembling with relief. I looked down at the water, just for a second, clearer than the last time, a hand. Then it disappeared into the dark beneath, leaving only a few small bubbles dissolving on the surface. The time I fell overboard, I didn't have time to think. I only remember slipping at the side of the boat, then water. Cold and dark and heavy from every direction, pulling me down the way something waiting does. I was never a strong swimmer. Out there with the current running, the depth, the distance from shore, ordinarily, a fall like that would have been the end of it. But I didn't sink. Something pushed me up from below, gently and firmly in a way that had no explanation, like a hand braced beneath my back, lifting me straight to the surface. I broke the water before I could panic, before I could swallow a mouthful, before I could do anything to save myself. Fu hauled me up into the boat, face white as paper, hands shaking. He asked if I was all right 3 times before I answered. I said I was. I was completely fine, and that was the strange part, the being completely fine. The village talked about it for days. Some said the sea god had tried to take me and failed, must not be my time yet. Said it with the particular tenderness of people who are relieved and frightened at once. Elder Hao listened and sighed, said he would perform a protective rite. His worry was exactly right, his pain exactly placed, not one thread out of place. I didn't tell him about the hand beneath the water. I still don't know why I didn't. The first night I walked to the sea in my sleep, I didn't know I had gone. I only know I closed my eyes in my bed and opened them on the sand, clothes soaked with salt water, hair plastered to my face with no memory of anything in between. The gap between those 2 moments was completely blank, not like dreamless sleep, but a different kind of blankness, as if my body had gone off without me. Elder Hao was already there. I didn't know how long he had been standing a few steps away, the oil lamp in his hand casting long, strange shadows across his aged face. He said nothing, only guided me home, his hand firm on my shoulder, his steps slow and measured across the damp sand. The next morning I woke in my bed, not sure whether the night before had been real, but the damp clothes were still draped over the chair, and my feet were still covered in sand. Fu was the one who told me it wasn't the first time. He said he had seen me walk to the sea like that more than once, eyes open but not seeing, feet never stumbling, never veering around anything, moving straight toward the waterline like someone who knew exactly where they were going. He'd called my name, gotten nothing, ran after me, no response, stepped in front of me, and I'd walked around him as if he weren't there. I just stood there watching you go, and there was nothing I could do, like watching a stranger. He paused. You really don't remember any of it? Nothing. He looked at me for a moment, then let out a breath, said nothing more. But after that, he'd look at me differently, not with worry exactly, but the look of someone watching something they don't understand and aren't sure they want to. The village started talking. Everyone had a theory. Someone said I was possessed, someone said the sea god was choosing, someone said it was a sign for this year's tribute. Elder Hao heard it all, sighed, said he would perform a cleansing rite for me. No one questioned him, only saw a father worried for his son, a village elder carrying yet another burden on already weary shoulders. I trusted him, because I had no reason not to. Then came the night I remember most. I came back to myself already standing at the water's edge, no memory of leaving the house, no memory of how I'd gotten there. I only knew that my feet were in that shallow cold where the waves just reached the tops of my toes, and the darkness around me was so complete and quiet that I could have believed I was the only person left in the world. Then something took my hand, not the wind, not the waves. A hand, or the shape of one, made of water, cold as the sea at midnight, took my hand. Slowly, carefully, the fingers lacing through mine like someone afraid of causing pain. No grip, no pull, nothing, only holding like someone afraid to let go. I stood completely still, didn't call out, didn't run. Didn't do anything a normal person should do in that moment. I only looked down at my hand and the thing holding it, clear and cold and more real than anything I had ever touched, and I didn't understand why I started to cry, not from fear, not from pain. Only because something in my chest recognized something I had no name for, no memory attached to, no way to explain in any language I knew, just recognition. And that recognition ached the way things ache when they've been lost for so long you've forgotten you lost them. I stood there until the hand of water dissolved slowly, like morning frost meeting sun, and all that remained was cold seawater running between my fingers. I don't know how long I stood there after that. At some point, the line between waking and not began to blur, not sleep, not dreaming, but something that lived between the two. I was still at the shore, still hearing the waves. Still feeling the sand beneath my feet, the salt wind on my face, the chill of water seeping into the hem of my clothes. But at the same time, I sensed, more clearly than I had ever sensed anything, that someone was standing very close behind me, not visible, not audible. Just feeling, the kind the body knows before the mind catches up. Something like breath, or what breath might feel like, brushed lightly against the back of my neck. The distance between us was no more than the reach of an arm. And something like peace spread slowly through my chest, slow and warm in a way that made no sense because whatever stood behind me was cold. A feeling I had no name for, but that was so familiar it seemed to have been there before I was born. The kind of feeling that only comes when you are with the person closest to you. The one who needs to say nothing, do nothing, just be there, and it is enough. I didn't know who was standing behind me, only that, for the first time I could remember, I wasn't alone. The next morning I told Elder how about the hand. He listened, and something shifted in his face. Not much. Only something passing briefly through his eyes very quickly before he could replace it with his usual look of worry. I wasn't sure whether I had really seen it or only imagined it. It held your hand, very gently, didn't pull me anywhere, just held. I paused, not knowing how to explain it properly. It wasn't frightening, not even a little. That's what I found strange. He was quiet for longer than usual, the silence of someone whose thoughts run deeper than the question they've been asked. Then he exhaled and drew me close, his hand patting my back in that slow, steady rhythm I had known since I was small enough to be afraid of the dark. That is a bad omen, child. The sea god is calling for someone. His voice broke slightly on the last words. A faint tremor, the kind that comes from someone trying very hard to hold steady. I leaned into him, trusted him. The way I always had, not because I had no choice, but because he was the only one I had, and I didn't know what my life looked like without him in it. 3 days later, Elder Hao gathered the village. He stood before everyone, back straighter than usual, shoulders heavier than usual, his face carrying something that looked like grief pressed down until it was almost breaking. He said the sea god had chosen. That the signs were not coincidence, the nightly callings, the hand made of water, the nets overflowing, the wave that didn't capsize. All of it was him marking the one he wanted, that this year's tribute was me. I stood in the crowd and listened to him say my name. Heard his voice break saying it, the way a voice breaks when someone forces themselves to do something that costs them most. Heard the murmurs of the villagers fall quiet. Heard someone cry in the back row, they pitied me, but I could see on their faces they pitied him more. This old man who had taken in an orphan child, raised him alone for more than 20 years, loved him like his own, and now had to offer him up himself. Could any grief be greater? They saw a father carrying what no one should have to carry. He looked at me across the crowd. For the first time I noticed, from the day he made the announcement until now, he had not once looked me directly in the eyes. I didn't let myself think too much about that. Only thought that perhaps he was hurting too much to look. Fu went to Elder Hao that same evening and asked to take my place. He knelt, something I had never seen him do for anyone, and said he wanted to go instead. That he had no family, no one waiting, nothing to lose that measured up to what I would lose. His voice didn't waver. Straight and certain, the way someone speaks when they've already decided before they open their mouth. The elder heard him out, went quiet a moment, then shook his head. He explained gently, patiently, the way you explain something painful but necessary to a child. That the sea god had chosen a person and substitutions were not possible. That offering someone else would be an insult to him, and that insult would not fall on the one who defied, but on the whole village. That he had seen it happen once, long ago, and he would not see it happen again. His reasoning left no room for argument. Then he lifted Fu to his feet and held him the same way he held me, hand on the back, voice low. Said he understood. Said he would not forget Fu's heart. Said if he could, he would go in place of both of them, but this was not something that could be traded away. I am hurting more than anyone in this room, because Yan is my son. Fu wept. The elder held him and looked across the room at me. I looked back. And for a reason I couldn't name, his eyes were dry. The last night, Fu came to my house. No one had asked him to. No invitation. He simply appeared at the door as the sun was going down, holding a small jug of wine I knew he had been saving, the kind fishermen only open for weddings or birthdays or the first sale of a new boat. He set it down between us, sat down, and said nothing. I said nothing either. We sat like that for a while. Two people, one jug of wine, the silence of those who don't know where to begin when there is too much they want to say. Then Fu poured 2 cups and pushed one toward me. We drank. No toast, no words, just drank. You remember when we used to sneak out to the beach at night when we were kids? His voice kept itself light. I remember, you were scared of ghosts but insisted on going. I wasn't scared of ghosts, I was scared of the dark, different thing. I smiled, he smiled. We both knew those weren't real smiles, just what you do when there's nothing else left to do. We told each other old stories until it was nearly morning. Small things, nothing important, nothing that mattered to anyone but us. The enormous fish Fu had caught and dropped back into the sea, the time I climbed onto the elder's roof to retrieve a kite that had gotten stuck. The morning we first went out fishing together and Fu got so seasick he retched over the side of the boat. Things no one else remembered but the two of us. Near dawn, I looked out at the sea through the small window. Black and still in the dark. I didn't know what I was thinking, only that my hand moved without meaning to, reaching toward the window, toward the sea, as if wanting to touch something out there. Then I stopped, drew my hand back. I didn't know what I'd meant to do. Fu had seen it, he didn't ask. We sat together until the sky grew light. The procession began at dawn. I wore white, the color of offerings, the color of deep water, chosen and sewn by Elder Hao's own hands weeks before. He had said he wanted to make this himself. When he draped it over my shoulders that morning, his hands were trembling. I saw them tremble and thought, he is trying not to cry. The procession moved toward the stone cape to the rhythm of distant drums and drifting incense. Elder Hao led, back straight, pace slow and steady. Seen from behind, he looked like a man carrying something invisible on his shoulders, something heavy and real that no one else could see. I walked behind him. The whole way I watched his back, that slightly bent back I had known since I was small enough to follow behind, the back I had watched every time I trailed after him to the shore for the rites. Today it looked heavier than I remembered. Today his shoulders seemed just slightly lower. I thought he was grieving, and I didn't want to be the cause of his grief. The villagers lined both sides of the path, heads bowed, none of them looking me in the face. Only the children looked wide-eyed, not yet understanding what was happening. I looked back at them and smiled. I didn't know why I could still smile. The flower boat was waiting at the water's edge. Elder Hao stopped me before I stepped aboard. He turned to face me, and for the first time in many days he looked at me. Not past me, not through me. Directly, for a long moment, like someone trying to memorize something, he said nothing. Only placed his hand against my cheek, wrinkled and cool, the hand of an old man, trembling slightly, then let it fall. I stepped down into the boat. They pushed it out. I sat among wilting garlands of sea flowers in the salt wind, looking back toward shore. The villagers stood in a long line on the sand, silent. Fu had knelt at the front, his head down, his shoulders shaking. I knew he was crying even without seeing his face. Elder Hao stood straight at the back of the crowd, his hands clasped behind him. He watched the boat drift further away, perfectly still, not moving, like something carved from stone. I watched him until the shore became a blur. Until I could no longer make out anyone at all, then I turned to face the sea. Night fell while the boat was still drifting, no moon. No stars, thick clouds had settled low since afternoon, the kind that meant the sea was gathering itself for something. The darkness around me was complete. I couldn't have seen my hand if I'd raised it. Only sound, the waves, the wind, the scrape of wood against the water's surface, three sounds woven into something that felt closer to silence than to noise. The boat drifted without a hand to guide it. I didn't know where it was going. I didn't know what I was supposed to do but sit and wait. I was not afraid. That was the thing I could not explain, that absence of fear, steady and unbroken through everything, unwavering even here, alone in the middle of a moonless sea with no one near and no idea what was waiting ahead, just sitting there and feeling a strange kind of peace. Then the boat stopped, no reef nearby, nothing to catch it. It simply stopped. And there was the sensation of something enormous looking up from below the water, looking directly at me, having been looking since before I noticed. I don't know how long I sat like that. At some point I stopped trying to hold myself upright. I lay back against the side of the boat, looking up at the overcast sky, listening to the even rhythm of the waves. My eyes grew heavy. Not sleep, only that half-suspended state between waking and sleep I had grown familiar with from all those nights drawn out to the shore. Then something held me from behind, cold, clearer than anything before. Not just a hand this time, a pair of arms, drawing me close from behind the way someone does when the gesture has become so habitual it requires no thought. Cold but not constricting, firm but not imprisoning, only holding. The way someone holds when they have missed something for so long they no longer want to let it go. I didn't move. I looked down at the water beside the boat, and the reflection on the surface was not only mine. There were two. Me and the thing holding me, no face, no clear shape, only the shadow of two people standing together the way people stand who have always stood that way. Then a small wave passed, and the water took the image away. I lay in those cold arms until the sky turned light. Didn't ask. Didn't need to. Only lay there and felt, for the first time in my life, no need to be anywhere else. The next morning I was still alive. I sat up on the stone shore, not knowing when the boat had drifted in, not remembering when I'd lain down, clothes soaked through with salt water. Hair stuck to my face. The sun had just cleared the horizon, low and red, throwing long, burn-colored light across the surface of the water. I looked down at my hands. Wet, cold, and a feeling faint, imprecise, like what remains of a dream after waking, that my hand had been held. That someone had been beside me through the night. That something had been there, real and clear, and now was not because it had vanished, but because it had stepped back. Like someone standing at a threshold, looking in, knowing they cannot yet cross. The boat was moored a few steps away, unmarked, without a scratch. I sat there until I heard oars from far off, the villagers rowing out to find me. Fu's voice breaking when he spotted me, calling back to the others, everyone pulling their boats closer. Elder Hao's voice, low and rough, like someone who hadn't slept all night, calling my name. I stood up. Waved. Back on shore, Elder Hao held me before I could say anything, both arms tightening around my shoulders, stronger than I expected from someone his age, and I heard his breath, heavy and sharp, like someone finally exhaling after a night of holding it in. He didn't speak at first. Only stood there holding me in the middle of the villagers crowding around while Fu started cursing at me through his relief. A miracle. He whispered it into my shoulder. You are my miracle. The village went quiet at that. Someone started crying. Someone began giving thanks to the sea god, saying he was merciful, that he had seen the village's devotion and spared the elder's child. I let him hold me. Looked out past his shoulder toward the sea. The sea was calm and blue in the morning light, gentle enough that no one would have guessed what had or hadn't happened there in the dark. Nothing on the surface, no shadow, no hand, just the sea. I didn't know what I was feeling. In the days after, I went back to ordinary life, or tried to out on the water with Fu as usual. Mending nets in the afternoon. Dinner with Elder Hao, listening to him talk about village matters, washing up, going to sleep. Things I had done 10,000 times in the same order, familiar enough that my hands could do them without my mind involved. But something had shifted on rough days, heavy swells, strong winds, whether that kept even veteran fishermen close to shore. I felt no unease. Not because I was reckless, but because something in me knew I would come back. I couldn't explain it, couldn't prove it, only knew it, the way the body knows things before the mind catches on. My nets were still the heaviest on the water, and wounds healed faster than they should. Once a line cut deep across my palm, deep enough to bleed for the rest of the afternoon. That night I went to the shore as I always did. By morning, the cut had nearly closed, new skin already pink and tender in its place. I looked at my hand for a long time, then I looked out at the sea. Said nothing. That night I stopped fighting it. Every night before I had tried, tying myself to the bed, asking Fu to keep watch, drinking the sleeping draught the village healer had given me. Nothing worked. My body always found its way out, whatever I did. That night I did nothing. Just lay down, closed my eyes, and let the calling lead me. I don't remember walking from the house to the shore. I only know that when I was there, the night had already deepened, the moon was high, and the sea was flat and still as hammered silver beneath it. I sat down at the water's edge. Did nothing, asked nothing, only sat and waited. Then I felt it. Not a hand this time, a presence. Something settling beside me, cold and quiet, leaving no mark in the sand, but undeniably, irrefutably there. No words, no gesture. Only sitting, the way people sit beside one another when they have sat long enough together that nothing more is needed. And I remembered the feeling, not through memory, no image, no name, no story attached, only the body remembering. The way this person sat beside me, that exact distance, that quiet that wasn't heavy but warm in its own way, I already knew all of it, from before, from a long time ago, from somewhere I could no longer reach. I stayed until morning. I didn't want to get up. The next morning, Elder Hao asked me if I had heard anything the night before, a normal question, a normal voice. He sat across from me at the breakfast table, cup of tea in hand, looking at me with his usual fatherly worry. I looked back at him. For the first time, I didn't answer right away. Not because I suspected anything, only because I was trying to find the words for what I had felt the night before and kept finding there weren't any. No way to tell someone else without losing something important in the telling, so I shook my head. Nothing, father, he nodded. The relief was visible, his shoulders settling slightly, his breath evening out. Then he turned to look out the window toward the sea. I looked the same direction. The sea was ordinary and blue in the morning, nothing there. But the way he looked at it, I didn't know why, was not the look of someone who had just been relieved. Fu came by near noon, still half asleep, carrying a handful of pastries just bought from the market stall. He sat down beside me, broke one in half and handed the larger piece over, then started talking, not because I'd asked, just because he always did, an old habit of filling silence with whatever the village had been doing. He said last night he'd seen Elder Hao sitting alone at the shore. Back hunched, arms folded over his chest, trembling in a way that had nothing to do with cold. Fu had started to go over and check on him, but the elder looked up and saw him first, immediately straightened, smiled, said he was only sitting outside to enjoy the air. He's old and he still pushes himself like this. Poor man. Fu took a bite of the pastry and shook his head. You should look after him more. I didn't say anything. That afternoon I cooked a pot of congee and brought it over. The elder ate slowly, spoon by spoon, then set the bowl down and reached over to pat my head, those familiar creased hands, the same gesture he'd made since I was small. With you here, I don't worry about anything. I sat beside him and watched him finish the bowl, didn't ask anything more. The villagers who passed by and looked in always said, Yan's so devoted, the elder is lucky. He would only smile and wave them off. A few days later, Elder Hao came to find me, not at breakfast like usual, but in the late afternoon, while I was sitting alone on the porch mending nets. He came and sat beside me without saying anything at first, only looking out at the water, the way someone does who has spent a lifetime looking at the sea. The sky was turning, clouds low and heavy, the wind carrying the smell of rain that hadn't arrived yet. The sea has been restless lately. He said it gently, like talking about the weather. Have you noticed? Yes, I'm worried. He paused. Not about the sea, about you. I set the net down and looked at him. In the late afternoon light, his face looked older than I remembered, or perhaps I had never looked this closely. The lines were deeper than I recalled, his eyes tired in the way of someone who hadn't slept properly in a long time. "I think we should perform another rite," he said. "A small one, just the two of us out at the stone cape, some incense, a prayer to release the bond between you and the sea god." "So he knows you are no longer his?" I thought for a moment. "Is that allowed, Father? Would it offend him?" "No," he shook his head, certain. "I know how it's done. I've done things like this before when someone in the village had drawn his attention before their time. It only needs to be done correctly." His hand settled on my shoulder. "I don't want you spending your life being pulled out to the sea every night. You can't go on like this forever." I looked at his hand on my shoulder, wrinkled and cool and familiar. "All right, Father, I'll go with you." We went to the stone cape the following night. Elder House said we didn't need anyone with us, that this kind of rite required quiet, a clear atmosphere, that too many people disrupted the intention. I told Fu I had an errand with the elder. He nodded without asking more. I had known the path to the stone cape since I was small, the worn dirt trail running along the shore, wild grass growing to hip height on both sides, the mingled smell of salt and seaweed that I associated with the feeling of coming home. Elder Hao walked ahead, one hand holding the oil lamp, the other carrying the basket of ritual items. I followed, watching his silhouette against the dark sky. The stone cape at night looked nothing like it did in daylight. The great black rocks reflected the faint moonlight into long, cold streaks. The waves broke against the base of the stones steadily, low and slow, like the breathing of something enormous sleeping below. I stood there looking out at the sea while Elder Hao arranged the offering items. He performed the rite the same way I had watched him do it all my life, salt scattered in a circle. Incense pressed into the crevices of the rock. Rice wine poured 3 times across the stone's surface, clockwise. The incantations delivered in a low, even voice, words I had never fully understood but had heard so often since childhood they had become background, as natural as the sound of the waves. I stood beside him and looked out at the sea. The water was calmer than usual tonight. The surface flat and dark, the moon reflected as a long silver path running straight from the horizon to the edge of the rocks, like a road drawn between 2 worlds. I looked at that reflected light and without thinking, reached my hand out toward it, old habit. From all those nights at the water's edge, I stopped, drew my hand back, turned to look at Elder Hao. He was still chanting, his back to me. Everything looked as ordinary as 100 other ceremonies. I turned back to the sea, drew in a slow breath. Salt and seaweed and night air, a smell I had never found oppressive, only familiar as if it belonged to me. Then the chanting behind me stopped. I turned around. Elder Hao was standing upright, no longer bowed over the offerings. He was looking at me, and for the first time in many days, he was looking directly into my eyes, not past me, not through me. I didn't understand why that look made something in me go cold. "You know," he said. His voice was still soft, still familiar, still the voice of someone who had called me his child for over 20 years. "From the moment I found you, I already knew who you were." I looked at him, didn't understand. "I've been waiting for you to grow," he continued slowly, as if savoring each word. "It really has been a long time." Something in his voice made me want to step back. I didn't, my feet stayed still, but the impulse came and I didn't know why. Then he turned toward the sea. His voice changed, not much, not suddenly. Only something that had been there beneath the surface all along, something I hadn't seen, rising now to meet the light. Old and cold and darker than anything I had ever heard from him. "Yuan," he called it out toward the night water. "If you want to keep him, come up here and keep him." The sea heaved, not gradually, instantly, as if something enormous had shifted beneath. Wind rose from nowhere, cold and sharp, snuffing out the oil lamp pressed into the rock. Darkness fell over the cape with only the faint moon remaining. I stood there, not understanding what was happening. Then something came up from the sea. I saw the shape before I saw the face, shadow falling across the wet stone, tall and straight, rising from the surface the way someone rises from somewhere very deep. The moment feet touched the rock, the wind dropped dead, as if the whole sea was holding its breath. Elder Hao looked at the figure. The smile remained at the corner of his mouth, voice still even, still warm, turning to me as if we were having an ordinary conversation. "You see. Ruthless, just like I told you, he came for you." I looked at the figure who had come from the sea, then I looked at Elder how something was wrong. Something was deeply, terribly wrong, and I couldn't yet understand what. His hand came down on my shoulder, heavy and warm and familiar. Exactly the way it had always been, all these 20 years. Then pain. I fell, no time to understand what had happened, only pain. Knees hitting the cold stone, hands reflexively catching myself against the wet rock. The wound was in my upper back on the right side where my hands couldn't reach, burning with the particular heat of something the body hasn't yet processed. I heard Elder howl behind me, unhurried, calm. Then I heard footsteps running from the direction of the sea, fast and certain, the sound of stone under bare feet, and something came through me like cold air. That cold, familiar. The cold I had known from all those nights drawn to the shore, from the hand made of water, from the arms that had held me on the boat. A collision. The sound of the Elder being pushed back. I looked up. The figure who had come from the sea was standing between me and Elder Howe, back to me, shielding me, and in that back, in the place meant for me, was the wound spreading outward. Not red. Water, dark seawater, cold, moving outward with each breath like a slow tide. The figure buckled at one knee. I didn't think, just lunged forward, both arms catching the figure, pulling them down with me, kneeling on the wet stone. The dark waters spread wide beneath my knees, cold to the bone, but I couldn't feel cold. I could only feel the person in my arms shaking, growing heavier with each second, losing something that couldn't be recovered. I looked down at their face. And without knowing why, without knowing how, I knew this face. Not the way you know someone you've met. The way you know someone you remember. The way the body knows before memory can follow, then everything came rushing back. 300 years ago, my name was Ruo. I didn't know that until this moment, but when it came, it didn't come as something foreign. It came as something I had known all along, only misplaced for too long, now finally returned to where it belonged. My name was Ruo, and I loved someone named Yuan. Yuan was a fisherman, more at home in the sea than on land, more familiar with the smell of salt than with the smell of cooked rice. He wasn't wealthy, wasn't powerful, had nothing to offer me but hands that were steadfast in heavy seas, and a way of looking at me like I was the thing he was most afraid to lose. I couldn't swim, but I wasn't afraid of the sea, because he was there. We used to sit on the stone cape, this same stone cape. I knew at the moment the memory came, staying until the sky was fully dark, until the stars were out, talking about small things that mattered to no one but us. He would look at me and smile, then turn away, the habit of someone who couldn't bear to be caught feeling what he felt. I always knew what he was feeling. I always did. Hao had been my closest friend since childhood. We grew up on the same lane, learned to read together, ran on the same stretch of sand through every summer. He was quick-witted, well-liked, always saying the right thing at the right time, the kind of person who understood what others needed to hear. I was fond of him, the way you're fond of a friend who has known you since before you knew how to hide anything. I didn't know, and would never know until it was far too late, that he looked at me differently. He never said so, not once. Perhaps because he already knew the answer. Perhaps because he had decided, long before anything happened, that if he couldn't have what he wanted by ordinary means, he would find another way. When Yuan started coming to my home, Hao still came by. Still smiled, still asked after things, still sat at the same table for meals as he always had. Nothing on the surface had changed, only his eyes. Sometimes I caught him looking at me in a way I couldn't account for, and then he'd look away and I wouldn't think more of it. I should have thought more of it. The day Yuan and I moved in together, the whole village came. I remember the sky was clear, the wind gentle, the smell of sea flowers someone had woven into garlands hung above the gate. I remember Yuan standing at the end of the path waiting for me, face flushed because he was never comfortable being looked at, hands pulling at the hem of his robe the way they always did when he was nervous. I smiled when I saw him do it. Hao stood in the crowd near the front, smiling brightly, lifting his cup to toast at exactly the right moment as always. I saw him and thought he was happy for us. I had no reason to think otherwise. He was the friend I had grown up with. He was someone I trusted. No one saw his eyes find my face one last time before he turned away. No one except him knew it was the last time. This is something I only came to know after I died. Hao had been studying for a long time before Yuan and I moved in together, perhaps before he admitted to himself that he would never get what he wanted by ordinary means. He searched, he learned, he paid the prices that ordinary people would not pay to acquire that knowledge, and he found it, that there was a ritual, old and dark and never written down because no one wanted it to be, that could grant a person immortality. Not health, not happiness, only living. Forever. The price was the life of the person you loved most. He read that and did not hesitate. 2 purposes with a single act. What he couldn't have would belong to no one, and in return he would live forever. In his mind, this was justice. In his mind, it was even deserved. I didn't know any of this while I was alive. I only know that one evening Hao sent word for me to meet him at the Stone Cape, that Yuan was waiting there, that there was something he needed to tell me. I went, without a second thought, because he was the friend I had trusted all my life. And I never came back. Yuan searched everywhere for me. I know this, the way the memory of the dead knows things they weren't there to see, that he ran through the whole village, asking everyone he passed, face white enough that people feared he might collapse. That when no one had any answer, he ran to the sea, because the sea was where he went when he had nowhere else to go. He found the Stone Cape. Hao was standing there alone, his hands not yet dry. Yuan looked at him, looked at his hands, looked at the sea around him, and he understood, without asking. Without needing an explanation, only looking and knowing, the understanding that comes when the truth is too large for the mind to refuse. I wanted to tell him not to go toward Hao, that he should run. That Hao had prepared and Yuan had nothing, but I was no longer there to say it. Hao didn't deny it. Yuan lunged at him, and Hao stepped to the side unhurriedly with a calm that made your skin crawl. No panic, no fear. Like someone executing a plan they had rehearsed long enough to do without thinking. Then he spoke, not shouting, not defending himself. Only speaking in the voice of someone explaining something obvious to a slow student. Gently enough that if you couldn't hear the words, you might have thought it was an ordinary conversation, that I should have seen him from the beginning. That he and I had grown up together. He had known me longer than Yuan, understood me better than Yuan, deserved me more than a fisherman with nothing but the smell of the sea. That if I had ever truly looked at him, just once, none of this would have had to happen, that this was not his fault. Yuan stood and listened, hands clenched at his sides, eyes never leaving Hao's face. I wasn't there, but if I had been, I would have told Hao that I had seen him. I had seen him for a long time. It was only that what I saw was not what he wanted me to see, and that was not my fault. A person who was never chosen cannot call themselves abandoned. Hao had prepared a short blade, made of metal that was not ordinary iron, dark and cold in a way that suggested it had been immersed in something that didn't belong to the ordinary world. He drove it into Yuan when he reached forward, fast and precise, like someone who had rehearsed the movement many times in his mind. Yuan fell. Water spread from the wound across the rock, not the red of an ordinary person, but something dark and cold, because Yuan had become something between a person and the sea long before anyone knew it. Hao stood and watched, his face unchanged, but Yuan didn't die at once. He lay on the stone, looking up at the night sky full of stars, breath heavy and short. And in him, I could feel it, even though I was no longer there. Something was building, not fear, not pain, hatred. The hatred of someone who knows there will be no other chance, pure and dense and burning in a way that nothing could smother. He looked at Hao standing there, composed as someone who has simply completed a task, and he used the last breath he had left to curse, not with learned words. Not with any ritual or ceremony, only hatred, real and dense, and pouring out in sounds that were half words and half something older than language, older than this village, older than this sea. You will live. Live forever. But every morning you wake will be another morning with your flesh rotting off your bones, aching so much you'd want to die but you can't. You will watch everything you love fall away, everything you've built come to ruin, and you won't. You will persist like something already rotting that no one can bury. The curse was released and it turned back on its source. Hao received immortality through his ritual, but the curse clung to him like a parasite to a host. As long as Yuan still existed, Hao would be gnawed at without end. And Yuan didn't fully die. Was bound into the sea, bound into the water, held between life and death by the very force of the curse he had spoken, 300 years. The last thing I remember from that life, not pain, not fear, the sound of the sea, and regret not for dying. But because Yuan was somewhere out there, alone on the stone cape, not knowing where I was, with no one beside him. Regret because the last time I had seen him was when he stood at the end of the path on our wedding day, face flushed, nervous hands pulling at the hem of his robe. I had smiled when I saw him do that. If I had known it was the last time, I would not have smiled, I would have looked longer. I would have memorized it more carefully. I would have said something to him instead of only smiling. But people never know which moment is the last one until it has already passed. I was still kneeling on the stone cape, the dark water still spread wide beneath my knees, cold through the cloth, cold into my skin, cold down to a depth in me I had no name for. My hands were still holding him, now I knew who he was. Knew this face, recognized not with my eyes but with something older and deeper than sight. Knew these cold hands, the hands that had held mine on those nights at the water's edge, that had held me on the boat, that had healed the cut on my palm overnight without asking whether I wanted it. Knew whose voice had been calling me to the sea each night, knew why I had never been afraid of the sea, knew everything at exactly the moment when there was nothing left to do with any of it. Yuan. The first time I had ever called his name. Not because I had learned it from anywhere, but because it had been inside me all along, waiting until now to find its way out. He looked at me. Hao stood watching Yuan fade and began to speak, not to justify himself, to pour out. 300 years of pressure looking for a way out in the moment he believed he had won. He said he had loved me, loved Ryuo, the person I had once been, more than Yuan ever had. That we had grown up together, that he had known me before Yuan knew I existed. That he deserved me more, he could have given more, been better, understood me deeper than someone who only knew the smell of the sea. That if I had only truly looked at him once, just once, none of this would have had to happen. He called himself the one who was abandoned, the one who was never seen, the one who loved truly and was not loved in return. He didn't realize, and I knew he never would, that I had never, for a single day, seen him as anything more than a childhood friend. That no one had refused him because no one had been asked. That he had built a love story inside his own mind, fed it with things he had imagined, then given himself permission to take revenge for it. He finished speaking, looked at me. His eyes held no regret, only something hollow and old and exhausted in the way of someone who has carried something for too long and never once set it down. Then he reached toward me. He wasn't finished yet. A hand made of water closed around Hao's wrist, not gently, the way it was on those nights at the shore. Not vaguely, the way I had felt things in those half-waking states. Real, clear, and certain and cold, with the certainty of something that had been waiting 300 years for this. Hao looked down at his wrist. For the first time in 300 years, I saw something on his face that looked like fear. Not the ordinary kind. The kind that comes from someone who believed themselves untouchable and is now discovering they were wrong. That fear looked different, stranger, uglier, more real than anything he had shown in 300 years. Yuan said nothing. There was nothing to say. 300 years needed no more words. The hand tightened. And how, immortal for 300 years, a man who could not die began to come apart. Not like sea foam, not like mist, like something that had been pretending to exist for too long and was finally being reminded it had no right to be here, fast, and leaving nothing behind. Yuan looked at me one last time, no strength left for words. I knew that, knew it the way I now knew so many things about him that I'd had no name for before. He only looked. With eyes that I recognized the way you recognize something you have known by heart in another life. 300 years he had looked at my shadow on the surface of the water that way. 300 years he had called my name into the storms. not in anger, not wanting to frighten anyone, only because he missed me. Because there was no other way to call the name of someone who was no longer there to hear it. I wanted to tell him that I had heard it, that I had always heard it, even when I didn't know I was listening. That all those nights drawn to the shore, the times the hand made of water held mine, the moments of sitting on the sand and not feeling alone when there was no one around, I had carried all of it, even without knowing where it came from. But I couldn't make my voice work. He smiled, lightly, tiredly, and more truly than anything I had ever seen, and then he dissolved. Gradually. Piece by piece, from his fingers to his palms to his arms, like sea foam dissolving in light, like something that had held its shape just long enough to do what needed doing and no longer had any need to, back to the waves. Back to the sea. Back to the place he had been for 300 years, but this time it was different, this time not imprisoned, this time going home. The sea went completely still, not the ordinary stillness of the sea at night. A different kind, heavy and full, the stillness of something very large that has just ended and left a space behind that nothing can fill right away. I was still kneeling on the stone cape. My arms still held the shape of someone I was holding, curved, hands open, keeping the space that had been enough for one person. But only seawater moved through my fingers now, cold and slow, dropping onto the stone in small drops. I looked at my hands. Wet, cold, empty. I didn't cry right away. Didn't do anything right away. Only sat in the quiet of the stone cape after everything was over and let the seawater keep running through my fingers until there was nothing left to run. My hands opened slowly. Like someone releasing what they know they can no longer hold, but needing the hands to understand what the mind already knew. Then I looked out at the sea, still. Blue. Nothing on the surface but the reflection of the moon. I walked back to the village alone. I don't know how long I walked along the shore path from the stone cape, only that when I looked down, my feet were still moving, my clothes still wet, and the sky had begun to lighten in the east. Fu was standing at the edge of the village. I didn't know how long he had been there. I didn't know if someone had told him or if he had simply known, the way old friends sometimes know when something has happened. He watched me approach, looking at my face, at my wet clothes, at my hands, then said nothing, not a single word. Just stepped forward, stood beside me and walked me home. That was enough. I told the village that same morning without preparation, without arranging my words. I simply sat down among the people who had spent their whole lives in Wangai, the people who had trusted Hao, who had given up their family members to him believing it was for the sea god, and told them. Everything. Beginning to end, no name omitted, no year left out. The village listened in silence, no one interrupted. No one stood up, only sat, every face young and old, and listened. And as they listened, I watched something change on those faces with each thing I said, not a quick or dramatic change, but the slow kind, the kind that comes when something too large to take in at once has to be processed piece by piece. No one cried at first, only sat there, looking at each other. Looking at the sea, and gradually coming to understand why their loved ones had never come home, not because the sea god demanded it, not because the sea had taken them, but because someone they had trusted had stood between them and the truth for 300 years. Then someone cried. And someone else after that. I sat among them, watching them grieve for people they had lost, and thought, at least they know now. At least those people are being cried for with the truth. The memorial rite was held 3 days later. No drums, no chanting. No one calling out to the sea god or asking anything of him, because the village knew now there was no sea god to petition, only lanterns. Each household made their own, small paper lanterns, candles inside, set out onto the water as the sun went down. One light for each person who had gone. The villagers stood along the shore in silence, watching the lanterns drift out on the current one by one, slowly, until the face of the sea was full of soft golden light, as if the sky itself was watching. I stood looking at those lights and thought, at least now they are called by their true names, not offering, not tribute, only people. Ordinary people who had lived and loved and did not deserve to die the way they did. Then I thought of what Fu had asked me before about the storms. About what they really were all those years, I told him. And then I told the village that it wasn't the sea god's anger. That it was those nights when he missed the person he loved so much and could do nothing, couldn't come ashore, couldn't call out the name, couldn't do anything but sit beneath the sea and remember. That when someone is crying with no tears to cry, the sky cries for them. The village heard this and went very quiet. Then someone looked up toward the sea, and for the first time in their lives, there was no fear in that gaze. In the years after, I still went to the sea every morning, the same spot on the stone cape, the flat stretch of rock that looked out toward the open water, where if you sat long enough you would see the sun lift from the horizon and throw long golden light across the surface. I knew every crack in that stone, knew the angle of the lean that let you rest your back, knew how the wind shifted with each season. The sea didn't storm without reason anymore. That was something I didn't know whether to call good or sad, because the storms being gone meant there was no longer anyone beneath the water crying, and I wanted to believe that was a good thing. I tried to believe it. In the early days, I'd come here and do nothing but look out at the water and wait, not knowing what I was waiting for, only waiting. Fu came and sat with me in those first weeks, wordless, staying beside me until I got up to go home. Gradually, he stopped coming, not because he no longer cared, but because he understood that some things a person has to do alone. I sat here and remembered a past life I had not lived through, the cold hands on those nights at the water's edge. The voice that called me to the sea, the voice I now knew belonged to who and why, the last smile before he dissolved. One morning that was no different from any other, ordinary light, ordinary waves. Wind carrying the smell of salt and seaweed the way it had since before I was born and would long after I was gone. I went to my usual place like every morning, hands on my knees, eyes on the horizon, not waiting for anything, needing nothing. Then I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the surf, where the water was just enough to reach the tops of their feet, where the line between sea and land was thinnest. Hair wet, clothes wet, looking down at their own hands, turning them over and back the way someone looks when they've just woken and are not yet certain that what they are seeing is real, like someone who doesn't know where they are. Like someone returning from somewhere very far away, who hasn't yet realized they've arrived, slowly, very slowly, with the movement of someone not yet accustomed to turning their head on solid ground. The figure looked back. I stood up and ran. Some people are with you for only a few years, but some wait 300 years. 300 years watching the person they love forget who they are. 300 years able only to stand in the dark, unable to touch, unable to say a name, unable to say, I miss you. The most heartbreaking thing is, Yuan never once blamed Ruo for forgetting him. The one who suffered most across 300 years was always the one who kept waiting. Perhaps the greatest love is not being loved in return, but this, that even as time left you behind, you never changed. So tell me, which is more frightening? A sea god the whole village believed to be a monster, or a man who wore the face of a kind father for more than 20 years? If you were Yan, knowing everything now, would you forgive how?